Kate stared at the empty chair across from her in the hospital cafeteria, her coffee growing cold between her trembling hands. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across her pale face. She had been sitting there for 2 hours, replaying the doctor's words over and over in her mind. The test results were conclusive. There would be no miracle this time. William found her there, still as a statue, her eyes fixed on nothing. He had searched every corner of the hospital after she disappeared from the consultation room. The moment he saw her hunched shoulders and the way her fingers gripped the paper cup, he knew she was drowning in silence again. This was how Kate dealt with devastating news. She retreated into herself, building walls so high that even he struggled to reach her. He approached slowly, like someone trying not to startle a wounded animal. The cafeteria was nearly empty, save for a few tired nurses grabbing quick meals between shifts. William pulled out the chair opposite Kate and sat down without saying a word. He had learned over their 8 years of marriage that sometimes presence spoke louder than any comforting phrase. Kate finally looked up, her green eyes rimmed with unshed tears. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. The words were trapped somewhere between her heart and her throat, too heavy and painful to release. This was their 3rd attempt at starting a family, and each loss felt like a piece of her soul being carved away. William reached across the small table and gently took her free hand in both of his. His thumb traced circles on her knuckles, a gesture that had become their silent language over the years. He could feel the tension in her fingers, the way she held herself so rigidly, as if moving might cause her to completely fall apart. The cafeteria sounds faded into background noise, the clatter of trays, distant conversations, the hum of vending machines. In their small bubble of grief, time seemed suspended. Kate's breathing was shallow, controlled, like she was afraid that even crying might be too much for her fragile state. A young couple at a nearby table laughed at something on their phone, the sound cutting through Kate's composure like a knife. She flinched, and William saw the moment her careful control began to crack. Her lower lip trembled, and she quickly bit down on it, trying to maintain the facade of strength she had worn for so long. William knew that Kate blamed herself, though the doctors had explained repeatedly that these things sometimes happened without any clear reason. She carried the weight of disappointment not just for herself but for him, for their families, for all the hopes and dreams they had built around becoming parents. Her silence was loaded with self-recrimination and what-ifs. The paper cup finally slipped from Kate's grasp, sending cold coffee spilling across the table. She watched the dark liquid spread, making no move to clean it up. It was such a small thing, but it felt symbolic of everything slipping away from her control. William quickly grabbed napkins from the dispenser, mopping up the mess while keeping one hand connected to hers. "I can't do this anymore," Kate whispered, her voice so quiet he almost missed it. These were the first words she had spoken since leaving the doctor's office, and they hit William like a physical blow. He squeezed her hand tighter, afraid she might disappear entirely if he let go. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Kate had always been the strong one, the optimist who found silver linings in every situation. But this loss, coming so soon after the previous ones, had stripped away her usual resilience. She felt empty, hollowed out like a shell of the person she used to be. William moved his chair around the table to sit beside her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, finally allowing herself to accept comfort. Her body shook with silent sobs, and he felt each tremor as if it were his own. They sat like that as the cafeteria slowly emptied around them, two people trying to hold each other together while their world shifted beneath them. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, and somewhere in the distance a PA system crackled with announcements about visiting hours and department closures. But Kate and William remained frozen in their moment of shared grief, beginning a journey that would test every foundation of their relationship and force them to find new ways to communicate when words failed them completely. The drive home was a study in careful silence. William kept glancing at Kate through the corner of his eye, watching the way she stared out the passenger window at the passing suburban landscape. Her reflection in the glass looked ghostly, translucent, as if she was already fading away from him. The radio played softly, but neither of them really heard the music that filled the space between them. Kate's hands lay folded in her lap, perfectly still except for the occasional tremor that ran through her fingers. She counted streetlights, mailboxes, anything to keep her mind from wandering back to the doctor's office and those terrible final words. The mundane details of their neighborhood, Mrs. Patterson's rose garden, the broken fence at the corner house, the children's bikes scattered on front lawns, felt surreal after the morning's devastation. William pulled into their driveway and turned off the engine, but neither of them moved to get out. Their small brick house looked the same as it had when they left that morning, hopeful and nervous about the appointment. But everything had changed in the span of a few hours. The nursery they had started preparing upstairs now felt like a monument to their failures. "I should call your mother," William said quietly, reaching for his phone. Kate's hand shot out to stop him, her fingers wrapping around his wrist with surprising strength. She shook her head, not trusting her voice. She wasn't ready for the sympathetic words, the gentle questions, the well-meaning advice about trying again. Not yet. They finally made their way inside, moving through their familiar routines with mechanical precision. Kate hung her purse on the hook by the door and kicked off her shoes, while William sorted through the mail that had accumulated on the entry table. Everything felt normal and completely wrong at the same time. The house still smelled like the cinnamon rolls Kate had baked the night before, back when they still had hope. She had been so certain this time, so sure that her body wouldn't betray her again. The scent now made her stomach turn, reminding her of naive optimism and shattered expectations. William watched Kate wander through their living room, touching objects absently, a picture frame, the throw pillow she had embroidered, the small cactus on the windowsill they had bought on their honeymoon. She moved like someone trying to remember who she used to be, searching for pieces of herself in the familiar surroundings. The afternoon stretched endlessly ahead of them. William had taken the day off work, expecting to celebrate or at least process good news together. Instead, they found themselves adrift in their own home, unsure how to fill the hours until bedtime. Kate curled up on the couch, pulling a blanket around herself despite the warm weather outside. William sat on the opposite end of the sofa, wanting to comfort her but unsure how. Every gesture felt inadequate. Every word seemed hollow before he could speak it. Kate had always been better at expressing emotions, at finding the right thing to say during difficult times, but now she had withdrawn so completely that he felt like he was reaching across an ocean to touch her. The phone rang twice during the afternoon, once from Kate's sister and once from William's office, but they let it go to voicemail. The outside world felt intrusive, demanding responses they weren't prepared to give. Kate pulled the blanket higher, covering her head like a child hiding from monsters. As evening approached, William attempted to make dinner, moving quietly around the kitchen while Kate remained motionless on the couch. He burned the garlic and overcooked the pasta, his mind too scattered to focus on simple tasks. The smell of charred food filled the house, adding another layer of wrongness to their day. Kate appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wrapped in her blanket, watching him scrape blackened bits from the pan. For a moment their eyes met, and William saw a flicker of the woman he married, the one who would have laughed at his cooking disaster and taken over with gentle teasing. But the moment passed quickly and Kate turned away. "I'm not hungry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She disappeared back into the living room, leaving William alone with his ruined dinner and growing sense of helplessness. He had always been a fixer, someone who could solve problems with logic and persistence. But grief wasn't a broken appliance or a work deadline. It was something that had to be lived through, survived rather than solved. That night they lay in bed inches apart but feeling miles distant. Kate faced the wall, her breathing shallow and controlled, while William stared at the ceiling trying to find words that might bridge the gap between them. The darkness felt heavy, pressing down on them both with the weight of unspoken fears and dashed hopes. William listened to Kate's quiet sniffles, knowing she was crying but trying to hide it. His heart ached with the desire to hold her, to promise that everything would be okay, but he knew those words would ring false. Instead, he lay still, matching his breathing to hers, offering the only comfort he could, his steady presence in the storm of her grief. 3 weeks passed in a blur of gray mornings and sleepless nights. Kate moved through their house like a ghost, completing tasks without purpose or joy. She watered the plants, folded laundry, prepared simple meals that neither of them had appetite for. William watched her careful routine with growing concern. recognizing the signs of someone going through the motions of living without actually being alive. The baby clothes they had bought remained hidden in the closet upstairs, wrapped in tissue paper like fragile secrets. Kate avoided that room entirely now, taking the long way around the hallway to reach their bedroom. The door stayed closed, and sometimes William caught her pausing outside it, her hand hovering near the knob before she turned away. William tried different approaches to reach her. He brought home flowers, her favorite chocolates, a puzzle they could work on together. Each gesture was met with polite appreciation that felt more distant than anger would have. Kate thanked him with empty smiles that never reached her eyes, then returned to her careful maintenance of their life together. Her sister Emma called every few days, voice bright with forced cheer as she shared neighborhood gossip and work stories. Kate would listen patiently, making appropriate responses at the right moments, but William could see how exhausted these conversations left her. The effort of pretending to be engaged with the world drained what little energy she had left. One evening, William found Kate standing in their kitchen, staring at the refrigerator where they had once hung appointment cards and baby name lists. The surface was now clean except for a few utility bills and grocery coupons. She had removed every reminder, every trace of their hopes, but somehow the empty space felt more devastating than the clutter had been. "We should go away for a weekend," William suggested gently, coming to stand beside her. "Remember that bed and breakfast in the mountains? The one with the hiking trails?" Kate nodded absently, but he could tell she wasn't really considering the idea. Travel required energy and hope for future enjoyment, both of which seemed beyond her reach. Sleep became Kate's escape from the waking world that felt too heavy to bear. She took long afternoon naps, claiming fatigue that went deeper than physical tiredness. William would find her curled up in their bed at odd hours, not really sleeping but not fully awake either, existing in a gray space between consciousness and dreams. Their friends began to notice the change. Dinner invitations were politely declined, weekend plans canceled at the last minute. Kate's book club called to check if she was okay after missing 3 meetings in a row. Each social obligation felt insurmountable, requiring a level of performance she couldn't sustain. William started working longer hours, partly from necessity but also from his own need to escape the suffocating sadness that had settled over their home. He felt guilty about leaving Kate alone, but her silence had become so complete that his presence seemed to make no difference. They were living parallel lives under the same roof, connected by shared grief but separated by their different ways of processing it. The house itself seemed to reflect their emotional state. Plants wilted despite regular watering, dust gathered in corners that Kate normally kept spotless, and rooms felt cold even on warm days. Their home had always been a sanctuary filled with laughter and music, but now it felt like a museum preserving the memory of happiness they used to know. Kate began avoiding mirrors, unable to recognize the hollow-eyed woman looking back at her. She had lost weight without noticing, her clothes hanging loosely on her frame. Self-care became mechanical, showers because they were necessary, meals because William worried if she didn't eat. The woman who once took pride in her appearance now viewed her reflection as a stranger's. One night, William woke to find Kate's side of the bed empty. He found her in the living room, sitting on the floor beside their coffee table, looking through old photo albums. Pictures of their wedding, vacations, holidays with family were spread around her in a careful circle. Her face was wet with tears, but she wasn't making any sound. "I keep trying to remember who I was before," she whispered when she noticed him watching from the doorway. "Before we started trying, before the appointments and tests and hope and disappointment. I can't find her anymore." Her voice was so small, so lost, that William felt his own composure crack. He joined her on the floor, gathering the photos with careful hands. There were images of Kate laughing at something off camera, her face bright with unguarded joy. There were pictures of them painting their first apartment, flower-covered and grinning after a baking disaster, dancing at friends' weddings with abandon. The evidence of their happiness felt overwhelming and heartbreaking. "She's still there," William said, though his voice lacked conviction. He wanted to believe it, needed to believe it. But Kate's grief had become so consuming that he sometimes wondered if they would ever find their way back to joy. The woman in the photograph seemed like someone from another lifetime, someone who believed in happy endings and trusted that good things happened to good people. Kate leaned against him, her body finally relaxing for the first time in weeks. They sat surrounded by memories of better days, holding on to each other while the present moment stretched around them like a long, dark tunnel with no visible end. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when Kate discovered William crying in their garage. She had gone looking for the Christmas decorations, thinking that preparing for the holidays might give her something to focus on, when she found him sitting on an overturned crate with his head in his hands. His shoulders shook with silent sobs, and the sight of his usually composed husband falling apart shocked her into awareness. William looked up when he heard her footsteps, quickly wiping his eyes and attempting to compose himself. But Kate had already seen the depth of his pain, the way their shared grief had been eating away at him too. She realized with sudden clarity that while she had been drowning in her own sorrow, he had been struggling to stay afloat while trying to save them both. "I don't know how to help you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I watch you disappearing a little more each day, and nothing I do makes any difference. I'm losing you, and I don't know how to fight something I can't see or touch or understand." His words hung between them, raw and honest in a way that cut through weeks of careful politeness. Kate sat down beside him on the cold concrete floor, seeing him clearly for the first time since that day in the hospital. His face was thinner, stress lines etched around his eyes, and she noticed how his clothes hung loosely on his frame. He had been suffering alone while she wrapped herself in grief like a protective shell, shutting him out when he needed her most. "I'm scared," she admitted, the words feeling foreign after weeks of silence. "I'm scared that if I let myself hope again, if I let myself feel anything good, it will just be taken away. It's easier to feel nothing than to risk being destroyed again." The confession felt like peeling back her skin, exposing nerves that had been carefully protected. William took her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. His fingers were cold, and she noticed how he had been biting his nails, a nervous habit from college that she hadn't seen in years. They sat in the dusty garage surrounded by boxes of their life together, camping gear from adventures they used to take, books they planned to read, tools for projects they would complete someday. "I miss you," William said simply. "I miss your laugh, your terrible singing in the shower, the way you used to steal food off my plate. I miss feeling like we were a team instead of two people trying to survive the same disaster separately." His words painted a picture of the life they had built together, the small intimacies that had been casualties of their grief. Kate felt something stir inside her chest, a flutter of recognition for the woman she used to be, the woman who had married this man because he made her feel safe and loved and capable of anything. She had forgotten that grief was something they could share instead of something that had to divide them. "I don't know how to get back to that," she said, leaning against his shoulder. "I don't know how to be the person you fell in love with when I can barely remember who she was." The admission felt like stepping toward the edge of a cliff, terrifying but necessary. William was quiet for a long moment, thinking about her words. A neighbor's dog barked in the distance, and somewhere down the street, children were playing in their yard, their laughter carrying on the autumn air. Normal life continued around them while they sat in their garage trying to figure out how to rejoin the world. "Maybe we don't go back," William said finally. "Maybe we figure out how to move forward as the people we are now. Different people, maybe sadder in some ways, but still us, still together." His suggestion was both frightening and liberating, the idea that they didn't have to recover their old selves but could build new ones. Kate considered this possibility, turning it over in her mind like a stone she had found on the beach. The idea of staying broken but being broken together felt more manageable than the pressure to heal completely. Maybe healing didn't mean forgetting or returning to who they were before. Maybe it meant learning to carry their grief differently. "I've been so angry," Kate whispered, surprised by the admission. "Not just sad, but furious. At my body, at the doctors, at every pregnant woman I see, at God or the universe or whatever decides these things. I've been so afraid of that anger that I shut down everything else too." Naming her rage felt dangerous but necessary. William nodded, understanding flooding his features. "I've been angry too. At the unfairness, at not being able to fix this, at feeling helpless. I think I've been afraid that if I showed you how angry and scared I was, it would make everything worse for you." They had both been protecting each other by hiding their true feelings, creating distance when they needed connection most. A car passed by on the street outside, and they heard the garage door opener engage at the house next door. Their neighbors were returning from work, coming home to families and normal Tuesday evening routines. Kate felt a pang of longing for that ordinary life, but also a growing sense that she and William might find their way to their own version of normal. "What if we tried talking to someone?" Kate asked, the words coming out before she could second-guess them. "Not to fix us, but to help us figure out how to do this better. How to be sad together instead of sad apart." The suggestion felt like a small act of hope, a tiny step toward actively participating in their healing instead of waiting for time to do all the work. William squeezed her hand, and for the first time in weeks, Kate squeezed back. Dr. Sarah Chen's office felt different from the clinical sterility of the hospital rooms they had grown to dread. Soft lighting, comfortable chairs, and warm earth tones created an atmosphere that invited conversation rather than diagnosis. Kate sat rigidly in her chair during their first session, while William perched on the edge of his, both of them uncertain about what they were supposed to say or do. "There's no right way to grieve," Dr. Chen said gently, after they had stumbled through introductions and explanations. "And there's no timeline for healing. What I can help you with is learning to grieve together instead of in isolation." Her words were simple but revolutionary for a couple who had spent weeks carefully avoiding each other's pain. Kate found herself talking about the silence first, how it had become her refuge and her prison. She described the way words felt too heavy to speak, how even simple conversations with grocery store clerks left her exhausted. William listened with surprise, realizing that what he had interpreted as rejection was actually Kate's way of conserving energy for basic survival. William shared his frustration with feeling helpless, his fear that any attempt to comfort Kate would be inadequate or unwelcome. He talked about lying awake at night, wanting to reach for her but afraid that his touch would remind her of everything they had lost. Dr. Chen helped them see how their different coping styles had created a cycle of misunderstanding and distance. Homework assignments felt strange at first. Dr. Chen asked them to spend 15 minutes each evening sharing one thing that had been difficult about their day and one thing they had noticed about the other person. The first few attempts were awkward and stilted, but gradually they began to find a rhythm. Kate learned that William had been struggling with his own guilt, wondering if he should have insisted on more tests earlier, if he should have found better doctors, if he should have somehow known that their bodies were working against their dreams. She had been so consumed with her own self-blame that she hadn't considered he might be carrying similar burdens. William discovered that Kate's withdrawal wasn't about him at all, but about her fear of being a burden. She had convinced herself that her sadness was too much for anyone to bear, that she needed to process her grief alone to protect him from drowning in it too. Her silence had been an act of love, misguided but well-intentioned. They started taking evening walks together, not talking about anything heavy, just moving their bodies through their neighborhood while relearning how to be in each other's presence without pressure. Kate noticed details she had missed during her weeks of interior focus. New flowers in neighbors' gardens, changes in the light as autumn deepened, the way William still unconsciously matched his pace to hers. One evening, they encountered Mrs. Patterson from 3 houses down, walking her ancient golden retriever. Kate had been avoiding these kinds of interactions, but Mrs. Patterson's warm smile and genuine concern caught her off guard. The older woman didn't ask invasive questions or offer empty platitudes. She simply said she had missed seeing Kate in her garden and hoped she was taking care of herself. The brief interaction left Kate feeling strangely lighter. She realized she had been avoiding not just the painful interactions but all human connection, cutting herself off from the simple kindness that existed in everyday moments. Mrs. Patterson's gentle acknowledgement reminded her that she was still part of a community, still valued and noticed. William began to understand that his role wasn't to fix Kate's grief, but to witness it. Dr. Chen taught him the difference between solving and supporting, between offering solutions and simply being present. He learned to sit with Kate's sadness without trying to chase it away, to hold space for her tears without feeling like his comfort was inadequate. Kate slowly began to reclaim small pieces of herself. She started cooking again, not elaborate meals but simple things that brought her pleasure. Soup that simmered all afternoon, bread that required kneading and patience. The repetitive motions of familiar tasks helped quiet her mind, and sharing the results with William felt like a small gift they could give each other. They attended a support group that met in the basement of a local church. Sitting in a circle with other couples who understood their specific kind of loss was both heartbreaking and healing. Kate heard her own experiences reflected in other women's stories and felt less alone in her struggle. William connected with men who shared his feelings of helplessness and his desire to protect their wives from further pain. The holidays approached, and instead of avoiding them entirely, Kate and William decided to create new traditions that honored their loss while still allowing for connection with family. They hosted a quiet dinner, invited only their closest relatives, and set a place at the table for the children they had hoped to welcome. It was sad but also beautiful, a way of acknowledging their grief while still participating in life. Kate's laughter returned gradually, first in tiny moments of appreciation for William's increasingly confident cooking experiments, then in response to funny stories Dr. Chen shared about her own family. The sound startled them both the first time it happened, but it also felt like a small miracle, proof that joy could coexist with sorrow, that healing didn't require forgetting their loss. William learned to read Kate's moods more carefully, recognizing when she needed space and when she needed closeness. He stopped trying to anticipate her needs and started asking what she needed, giving her permission to be honest about her changing emotional landscape. Some days she wanted to be held. Other days she needed to process alone, and both responses became acceptable. They planted a small garden together in early spring, choosing perennials that would return year after year. The act of putting seeds in the ground felt like a leap of faith, a commitment to being present for future seasons. Working side by side in the dirt, they talked about their hopes for the plants and, gradually, their hopes for themselves. A year later, Kate found herself standing in the nursery doorway without the crushing weight of despair she had carried for so long. The room was no longer a shrine to lost possibilities, but simply an empty space with potential. Sunlight streamed through the windows she had kept closed for months, illuminating dust motes that danced in the warm air. William appeared beside her, no longer approaching with the careful hesitation that had marked their early healing. They had learned to navigate each other's emotional weather, understanding that grief ebbed and flowed like tides rather than disappearing completely. Some days were harder than others, but they had stopped apologizing for their sadness or rushing toward artificial happiness. "I was thinking we could turn this into an art studio," Kate said, surprising herself with the suggestion. She had been a painter before marriage and motherhood became her primary focus, but her easel had gathered dust in the basement for years. The idea of creating something beautiful in this space felt like a gentle revolution, transforming a room of sorrow into one of possibility. William smiled, remembering the woman he had married who spent entire weekends lost in watercolor landscapes and charcoal portraits. Her art had been one of the first casualties of their fertility journey, abandoned when appointments and treatments consumed all her mental energy. Seeing her consider returning to something that brought her joy felt like watching her remember who she was beyond their shared loss. They spent the weekend moving furniture and planning the transformation. Kate researched easels and lighting while William measured windows for better natural light exposure. The project gave them a shared goal that had nothing to do with healing or fixing, but everything to do with building something new together. Their relationship had evolved into something deeper than what they had before, marked by hard-won intimacy and honest communication. They fought sometimes now, real arguments about money and household responsibilities and future plans, which felt healthier than the careful politeness that had characterized their early grief. Conflict meant they were both engaged enough to disagree, invested enough to work through problems together. Kate's sister Emma visited one Saturday, bringing her 2 young children who filled the house with noise and energy. Kate had dreaded these visits during her darkest months, but now she found herself enjoying her nephew's creativity and boundless curiosity. She helped them build elaborate block castles and listened to their detailed explanations of playground politics without feeling the sharp pang of loss that had once made such interactions unbearable. "You seem different," Emma observed while they watched the boys play in the backyard. "Sadder in some ways, but also more solid, more yourself." The comment surprised Kate, but she recognized the truth in it. She had learned to carry her grief differently, as part of her rather than something that defined her entirely. William had returned to his woodworking hobby, spending evenings in the garage creating furniture and small decorative objects. The physical work helped him process emotions that were still too complex for words, and the finished pieces gave him a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with their fertility struggles. Kate loved watching his hands shape raw wood into beautiful, functional objects. They had stopped actively trying to conceive, a decision that felt like both loss and liberation. The constant monitoring of cycles and timing had turned their physical relationship into a clinical endeavor, and stepping away from that pressure allowed them to rediscover intimacy without agenda. They made love when they wanted to, without calendars or thermometers or desperate hope weighing down every encounter. Dr. Chen had helped them understand that healing didn't mean returning to who they were before, but becoming who they were meant to be after. Their marriage had been tested and stretched and nearly broken, but the foundation they had built proved stronger than they had imagined. They had learned to weather storms together instead of separately. Kate began volunteering at a local women's shelter, helping with their children's art programs. Working with kids who had experienced trauma taught her about resilience and the healing power of creative expression. The children didn't know about her losses, only that she was the lady who taught them to mix colors and encourage their wildest artistic impulses. The volunteer work connected Kate to a purpose larger than her own pain, reminding her that suffering was universal, but so was the capacity for recovery. She watched children who had experienced unimaginable hardships laugh and create and hope, and their resilience inspired her own continued healing. William surprised her one evening by signing them up for dance lessons, something they had talked about doing during their engagement, but never followed through on. The classes were awkward and fun, filled with other couples learning to move together in new ways. Dancing required trust and communication, skills they had spent the past year rebuilding in other areas of their lives. They traveled more, taking weekend trips to places that required no special meaning or memory-making pressure. They visited art galleries and hiked mountain trails and discovered small towns with quirky museums. These adventures reminded them that they were still young, still capable of wonder and discovery, still able to write new chapters in their story together. Kate's art began to reflect her journey, abstract paintings that captured emotions too complex for words. She painted grief in deep blues and purples, but also hope in bright yellows and healing in soft greens. The canvases told the story of their transformation, visual representations of pain transmuted into beauty. Their home gradually filled with new memories and traditions that honored both their loss and their continued life together. They still set a place at the table during holidays, but they also hosted friends and celebrated achievements and marked the passage of seasons with gratitude for what they had, instead of mourning for what they lacked. 3 years after that devastating day in the hospital cafeteria, Kate and William found themselves in an unexpected place of peace. Not the absence of sadness, but the presence of something larger. A life built on acceptance and authentic connection, rather than the relentless pursuit of a single dream. Their love had been refined by fire, emerging stronger and more intentional than before. Kate's art studio had become the heart of their home, filled with canvases that documented their journey from despair to acceptance to renewal. Her paintings now hung in a local gallery, and she taught weekend workshops for other women working through various forms of loss. Art had become her way of transforming pain into beauty, of helping others find visual language for experiences that defied words. William had started a support group for men whose partners were struggling with infertility and pregnancy loss. Meeting monthly in their living room, the group provided a space for men to express feelings they often felt pressure to suppress. He had learned that his own healing mattered too, that supporting Kate didn't require sacrificing his own emotional needs. They had made the difficult decision to stop fertility treatments permanently, choosing to redirect their parental energy toward their nephews, Kate's volunteer work, and mentoring young couples in their community. The decision brought grief but also profound relief, freeing them from the monthly cycle of hope and disappointment that had dominated their lives for so long. Their marriage now operated on principles they had learned through necessity: radical honesty about their emotional states, regular check-ins about their individual and shared needs, and permission for both joy and sorrow to coexist in their daily lives. They had developed their own language for grief, understanding that some days required extra gentleness while others called for celebration of how far they had come. Kate often thought about the woman she had been in that hospital cafeteria, drowning in silence and convinced that her pain was too much for anyone to bear. That woman couldn't have imagined this life they had built, couldn't have conceived of healing that honored loss rather than erasing it. The journey from that day to this one felt like traveling between two different countries, each with its own customs and expectations. Their home had evolved too, no longer holding its breath for children who would never come, but instead welcoming whoever needed sanctuary. Friends going through divorces slept in their guest room. Young couples sought their advice about navigating early marriage challenges, and Kate's art students often stayed for dinner and long conversations about creativity and resilience. William's woodworking had progressed from hobby to small business, creating custom furniture for clients who appreciated handcrafted beauty. Each piece he made was infused with the patience and attention he had learned during their healing process. His workshop had become his meditation space, where the repetitive motions of sanding and shaping helped him process complex emotions. They still attended Dr. Chen's office occasionally, not for crisis intervention but for maintenance and continued growth. Therapy had become as routine as exercise or healthy eating, a practice that supported their ongoing emotional fitness. They had learned that healing wasn't a destination, but a way of traveling through life with greater awareness and compassion. Kate's relationship with her body had transformed from antagonism to cautious friendship. She had learned to appreciate what her body could do rather than punish it for what it couldn't. Yoga classes helped her reconnect with physical strength and flexibility, while meditation taught her to observe difficult emotions without being overwhelmed by them. The annual anniversary of their loss had become a day of remembrance rather than devastation. They visited the small garden they had planted in their backyard, where a memorial stone marked the children they had hoped to meet. The ritual was sad but also peaceful, a way of honoring their loss while affirming their continued life together. Their extended family had learned to navigate their grief too, no longer asking invasive questions about future plans or offering unsolicited advice about adoption and alternative treatments. Instead, they celebrated Kate and William for who they were now, appreciating the depth and wisdom their struggle had created. Kate sometimes served as an informal counselor for other women in her neighborhood, not offering solutions but simply witnessing their pain with the authority of someone who had walked a similar path. She had learned that healing often happened in community, through shared stories and mutual recognition of struggle and survival. On quiet Sunday mornings, Kate and William often found themselves back in their kitchen, drinking coffee and reading newspapers like they had before their world shifted. But the quality of their presence with each other had changed fundamentally. They had learned to treasure ordinary moments, understanding how quickly circumstances could change and how precious simple contentment could be. Their love story had become something different than they had originally written. Not the tale of a young couple building a traditional family, but the deeper narrative of two people learning to hold both heartbreak and joy simultaneously. They had discovered that some of life's most profound gifts came wrapped in packages they never would have chosen, teaching lessons they never wanted to learn. Kate no longer searched for the woman she had been before their losses, having made peace with the person she had become through them. This new version of herself was more complex, sadder in some ways, but also more compassionate, more appreciative of beauty, more capable of sitting with difficult truths without flinching. As evening light filled their art studio, Kate worked on a new painting while William read nearby, their comfortable silence punctuated by small observations about their day. They had learned that love could be quiet as well as passionate, that healing could happen in unremarkable moments, and that sometimes the most profound transformations occurred not despite suffering, but because of how they chose to move through it together.